Hello and welcome to today's Power Hour from the Inspiring Workplaces Group. I'm Matt Manners, CEO and founder of Inspiring Workplaces, and I love this format of event, and I hope you do too. Getting a bit of a sense of deja vu right now, having done a 24-hour event last week called the Workplace Inspirathon. I'm sure a lot of you watched it, and that will be coming on our website on demand very, very soon. It's also a pleasure to be doing one of these events in daylight because I did the Australian leg from midnight to 10 a.m. last week. But as time is short, we don't have 24 hours, we just have the one. Let's get straight into it. Today is our fifth Power Hour of 2023. And at this time, we're focusing on performance management and developing dispersed teams. Developing dispersed teams is probably one of, if not the greatest challenges professionals are trying to solve the world over right now. Successful dispersed teams rely on clear communication, shared goals and objectives, and a sense of connection between team members. By embracing the benefits of a dispersed workforce, such as increased diversity and flexibility, organizations can tap into new talent pools, improve work-life balance for their people, and boost productivity. So we have three storytellers today to share different perspectives, research and advice with you before we have a group conversation at the end, time permitting, of course. I also want to say a big thank you to our headline partners for this Power Hour, Pando and Tatio. Without their support, events like this and a free community for you just wouldn't be possible. So thank you so much, and please go check them out. So let's get started and to our first storyteller. Our first storyteller is Jenny Field, and she's CEO and founder of Redefining Communications. Jenny's an international speaker, author, podcaster, and business communication strategist. She specializes in helping organizations go from chaos to calm, working with them to understand how to get teams to work together better, and review how operations can work more effectively. In a career spanning nearly 20 years, she has worked in defense, retail, hospitality, as well as not-for-profit. And it's these experiences that helped contribute to the development of her field model and book Influential Internal Communications, which was published in April 2021. Before setting up her business, Jenny worked as a communications director for a global pharmaceutical and was also global head of communications for FTSE 250 hospitality business. She's recently done some research that she's going to share with us today, and she's actually done it via a pre-recorded video. So let's hear what Jenny has to say.
My name is Jenny Field, and I'm the founder and CEO of Redefining Communications. Now, we're a consultancy that specialises in helping organisations be less chaotic by helping them communicate better. And in recent years, we've been doing some research into deskless workers. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is performance management with this particular group, but also specifically the research and the findings that we've only just found out and launched, so that if you're looking at this deskless worker population, you can know a little bit more about what they need from you from communications, HR, or as a leader. Now, this research that we've just done was a repeat of research that we did in 2019. So back then, I wanted to find out what was going on with deskless workers. It's been a challenge for communication professionals for a long time to reach this specific audience. So I wanted to find out why. That was 2019, and we published a report and some data around that. But fast forward to this year, I was really intrigued to see whether there was any difference from the pandemic. First of all, has that changed how we communicate with this group of workers? But also with the rise of technology. There's been so much introduced into organizations over the last few years, different platforms, things like Slack, Microsoft Teams, Yammer, Engage, all sorts of different things out there. So I wanted to find out whether the technology had really made a difference. So that was the reason for doing the research again. And the research was conducted in the UK and Ireland. It's a survey-based piece of research where we go on site to different locations, armed with an iPad and the survey, and we sit and chat to the deskless workers, completing that survey with them. So we get some anecdotal and written reports from the researchers and also the survey data as well. And we did this with 9 different organisations across different industries, which is important because I didn't want to research just one specific industry. So we've covered retail, we've covered the health service, we've covered manufacturing, all sorts of different organisations that give us a nice understanding of this group of deskless workers. So that's what we did in 2023, and I've got some key stats I can share with you about this population. So interestingly, 49% think senior leaders are good communicators, which is really good news. That has been a bit of a shift. Using company apps on their phone, this is specifically company apps that they receive news from. So not apps they can interact with like Teams or anything like that. But that has increased from 17% in 2019 to 33% in 2023. And this is specifically looking at content about the organization. So that's the kind of content they're getting from that channel. Interestingly, team meetings, whether they're online or face-to-face, have gone down since 2019, but we're seeing quite a big rise in how engaged people are. So 83% said they feel part of the team they work in, and I think it's around 71% said that they felt part of the organization as well. So the engagement challenge that we often talk about might not be as much of an issue for this population as we might think. When we did the research in 2019, we talked a lot about line manager skills and relevance of communication. They were sort of the two big things that we talked about. What's really great to see this year is that that has improved. So we've seen a real shift in that, which is really great. There's still work to do. We're definitely not nailing that, but there's definitely been a move in the right direction, which is really good. Things like notice boards haven't really changed in usage, and they're also seen as useful as things like WhatsApp, which is quite interesting for this group. Email newsletters are on the rise, even though maybe people aren't having access to email, so that's interesting. But WhatsApp is one of the things that's seen the biggest rise as well. So WhatsApp for department or kind of team content, that's gone from 18% in 2019 to 47% in 2023. Now, these are some of the key stats that we found out. Alongside this, we asked this group of workers how much of their time is spent doing their job. And 90% of their time is spent doing their job. That is serving patients on the front line, serving customers in stores, working on a manufacturing line. That's 90% of their time. Now, that's quite big when you think about how much of maybe our time. I consider myself more of an office worker. So most of my time is doing my job, but my job is at a computer, sending emails, writing reports, writing presentations. That's a very different type of work to the work that frontline workers are doing, which we understand and we can talk about how different it is. But what the research has showed us this year is the cultural differences that exist between that, where we are much more of a written culture in an office environment, and they are much more of a verbal culture on the front line. Now, this is important because it's not just about content being more chatty or content being done in a sort of different way or making it all verbal communication. It's an entirely different sort of language and communication structure. The best example I can give you about this is when I hear people talk and do different talks on different things where I don't really know much about the subject matter, or I don't understand it in a hugely intellectual level. So let me give you an example of what I mean. If you think about Professor Brian Cox, who talks about physics and space and all those things, that my brain doesn't really work that way. It's never been a big strength of mine. And when he speaks, and I've seen him speak at events, I know what all of the words mean, but I don't know what he means when he puts them together. And that's exactly the way people have phrased it back to me when I have done work in previous roles where we've not quite hit the mark for people that work in manufacturing, because I know what all these words mean, but together I don't really understand. It's a very different communication structure, behavior, way of communicating. And that's the challenge. So if I take some of this research and apply it to a performance management perspective and looking at how we're working with this population, there's lots of things in here to consider. There's the use of things like WhatsApp, which is quite dangerous and quite risky for organizations. That's had a huge rise, 18 to 47%. That's quite big. And actually, it's a tool that's probably not sanctioned by IT or legal or HR. And therefore, there are quite a lot of risks associated with that as a channel. So that's really important to think about the different channels that they're using, why they're using them, how they're using them, and how that might play a role in some of those performance management conversations. And also what might be contributing to some of those things. Some of this is quite uninclusive, which is not particularly helpful either. So there's lots of different things in there about the channels that they're using to communicate. The other piece to think about is the time they have with each other. We talk a lot about structures in an office environment of one-to-ones and team meetings. We've said already that team meetings are on the decline. They just don't have that sort of infrastructure around them. So having really good conversations, good relationships that are built over time does just take time, and being very intentional about that is really important, because we're not necessarily making the time for that, because time is money and we need people on the floor or out doing whatever they need to be doing. The other thing I just want to mention from the research is the reason why these deskless workers work. Now, that sounds a bit strange, but in the research, we've categorized them as shop floor and factory floor. Now, that's because what we're looking at is the sort of customers they interact with. So if I'm a shop floor worker, maybe working in a retail environment, my customers are coming to me because they want to. They're coming to me because they like the brand, they're interested in the brand, and I need to be knowledgeable about the brand to sell it to them. And I probably care about the brand. I might not work in a shop or a store or for a brand that I don't care about. So that's a shop floor worker. If we look at a factory floor worker, they may or may not have customers, but if they do have customers, those customers are coming to them because they don't have a choice. They're using a service that's on offer, probably in the public service, that they have to use, and therefore the people that work there sort of by proxy because of where they live or whatever that might be. But the people that work there care about the job that they're doing, the task that they're doing, not necessarily their place of work or the brand of that particular organization. Now, that's important because our engagement is different. We're motivated by different things. Either we're motivated by the task and it's quite vocational, or we're motivated by the brand and what that is. And therefore, that means we need different content, we have different needs, and there's just a very different way of working, a different connection across those two different workers. So having some time to think about that is really important in terms of what people need to feel connected, what they need to feel engaged, but also just how much time they've got to do that. So really coming back to, do we really need to communicate this? How is it adding value to that individual? All of those things are really important questions. So I hope that's been helpful. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of our research. There are links available to download the report. I've also recorded a podcast episode that touches on this as well. So there's lots of different ways to find out a bit more. And of course, feel free to reach out to me either on email or through LinkedIn or any other social media platform. And I would be happy to answer any questions or chat a bit more about this specific population and how we can communicate better with them.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And obviously taking the tack from the communications perspective there. Quite a few things that were said that I would like to explore with our next two storytellers when we get around to having that conversation. But let's move on. That's the nature of the Power Hour. We get our storytellers presenting, and then we talk afterwards. So to our next guest, next storyteller, Barbara Gago is the founder and CEO at Pando. She spent her career as a CMO building and scaling companies from pre-Series A to scale-up mode. In her career, she brought companies like, I'm sure you've heard of, Culture Amp and Greenhouse to market. And prior to finding Pando, she was a CMO at Miro, leading the rebrand from Real-Time Board to Miro and scaling the business from 3 million to 50 million in ARR in just under 2 years. Having worked at the intersection of people tech and future of work for over 10 years, she's an expert at building high-performing teams, processes and programs that result in effective, rapid scale and meaningful business outcomes. And having had the privilege to have met her a number of times, Barbara's just incredibly impressive, and I can't wait to hear what she has to share with us today. So please welcome Barbara. Hello.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. And we actually have met in person, which is pretty impressive.
I know. It's so rare these days.
Yeah.
So and hopefully we'll again soon. So
Yeah.
I don't want to take up any of your time, so I'm going to let you do your thing, and then we'll come back and have a chat at the end.
Sounds good. All right. I won't do too much of an intro on myself since, thank you, Matt, already gave me one, but we're going to talk about unlocking impact and performance for distributed teams. The last session I thought was really interesting. I really like the rapid fire format of this event. We're going to be looking more specifically at knowledge workers. One thing I will say that Matt didn't mention, but is kind of putting me in a position to be uniquely sort of qualified to understand, is that I've been mostly the distributed person. So a lot of the companies that I started working with as first head of marketing were based outside of where I lived. And I typically was building kind of the office or the team there. So I've been working in distributed teams for about 12 years now. And so I have a lot of insights from that just as a manager and a leader, and also an individual who's working in that context, which a lot of people are looking and working in now. I won't go too much into Pando. Just to give a high level, Pando is an employee progression platform. Our goal is essentially to kill performance reviews. So I'm sure everybody can relate to the hate of that performance review. So diving in, I want to just say, and I think everybody knows this, but the pandemic was really an inflection point for what the workplace is and was. It's been evolving over the years. A lot of the systems and tools that we've brought into the workplace actually come from like when work was at factories. And I think that this change this quickly is both really disruptive to everybody, but also a huge opportunity to really fundamentally rethink some of the tools and systems and ways that we do things. And also, how are we adapting to the world around us? I think it also triggered what I call a perfect storm. So remote work being an obvious thing that came out of that, because even though that trend was growing over time, post-pandemic, a lot of companies have gone fully remote. If they had offices, they're doing kind of like hybrid model, but a lot of people are still working from home offices. I think diversity and equity has become a much bigger and important topic. One, because now, of course, with remote work, you can hire people anywhere. So what does that mean in terms of culture? How do you communicate at that level when everybody's in a different place, has different experience with work, performance management, et cetera? There's also, over the last several years, been a lot of flare-ups, I would say, social injustice related to like equity and inclusion and discrimination, a lot in the US. And this has really led to both legislation around things like pay equity and pay transparency, but also expectations of employees who want different things in their workplace. The power dynamics, I think, is interesting because as everybody remembers, like right as the pandemic was sort of starting, this was a big deal that there was a great resignation and everybody was leaving and changing jobs and compensation got really high. And now it's kind of shifted in the other direction because companies and organizations have been reducing headcount and kind of recalibrating and shifting and thinking about performance and profitability and things like that. The overall trend, however, is still towards employee power and having power in organizations, and the preferences that they have definitely changed. And a lot of that is about what the workplace means, what work means to them, if they have purpose, does it make them happy, how much are they going to be working, are they going into the office, are they not going to the office? And I think that fairness and kind of equity piece is also really important to the newer generation of folks that are coming into the workforce. So because the context of the workplace has shifted, so does our paradigm for how we think about, measure, and facilitate high-performing teams. I think it's really different now, for example, if you were a manager or had managers who kind of managed by being around their team, seeing their team, flying by the desks, popping in, whatever. Obviously, a lot of that has shifted and everything is, a lot more things are happening remotely and online. And so how do we actually create structures and foundations and systems and communication and collaboration and things around performance to actually get what we're trying to get and also make sure employees are aligned? The way that performance happens today still, even though we've kind of made this rapid shift in workplace, and I think many companies are trying to change how they're doing this, but the way that we usually think about performance and sort of categorize performance falls into this like broad umbrella of how we execute it through annual reviews, maybe biannual if you're lucky, But the problem with this process is that it's point in time, it's a very big scope, it's extremely time consuming, it's usually very subjective, bias, maybe you have one rating for overall performance. Typically it's not action oriented, it's very qualitative, and there's a lot of lack of visibility for remote workers. And this was the case even before most teams went remote. In my view, and what I'm seeing with a lot of companies who are thinking differently about this, is how do we move from that annual or biannual cadence into a more continuous, what I call progression instead of performance review. So it's kind of flipping the paradigm around how are we thinking about this. If I'm a tennis player and I'm playing my whole season and waiting till the end of the year to get that feedback from my coach, well, obviously I'm going to be missing a lot of opportunities to grow, but also compound that growth with continuous feedback, continuous coaching. And so we really want to be able to create systems and structures that enable more bottoms-up, iterative, and equitable progression. And so what does that look like? Continuous progression is really about creating transparency that empowers on-demand, iterative, ongoing, trackable growth for everybody at the company. The benefits is that it becomes more equitable, it becomes more streamlined, you sort of get out of your own way, it's more employee-driven. There are things that are needed. It's contextualized by level. It's empowered by short ongoing assessments, regular structured feedback, and we're going to talk about how you can get that structured feedback. So real quick, 5 ways to unlock performance specifically for distributed teams. So standardizing and making transparent job levels is one. This will also impact pay equity. This is how employees grow in your organization. It's how you enable equity in how you're looking at performance across different employees. It helps you hire better, not just by attracting talent because of it, which keeps you competitive, but also making sure you're hiring people at the right level and not focused on hiring by title. Mitigating risk around pay equity. So this is really, really important for the pay transparency laws that are coming into place both in the US as well as Europe. So the more transparency required, the more justification you will need for why different people are at different levels and paid the way they're paid. So this is step 1, standardizing and creating transparency around job levels. The second is career tracks. So when I talk about career tracks, I'm talking about 2 parallel tracks for individual contributors and for managers. I talk to a lot of companies about this, a lot of people leaders, a lot of executives, and there still tends to be very often this like stacked approach where you have a few individual contributor levels, and at some point it tips into management and then it's manager, and it's like all one kind of path. In order to really optimize performance, retain talent, and also prepare for the future, we need to be able to have a career track that's iterative and creates more steps for individual contributors to also grow. Only 15% of employees actually want to be managers. Many people pursue that because that's the only way to level up at the organization. So this is just an example of, on the left is kind of the extreme, and you might imagine maybe a few other manager roles. In the middle, you can start to see parallel tracks, and on the right, you can see parallel tracks and also iterative steps within that track. There's a couple other things to note here. When I look at that job levels, because job levels also create the structure for then your career tracks, we see often that there's maybe too few levels. The reason that's a problem is because then if you're trying to retain people for 6 years and they don't get to grow in their level, they're not going to feel like they have career progression and they're not going to want to stay at the company. The middle one here is kind of that stacked track where you go from being a junior person to being a senior person, but the senior person means that you have to also be a manager. And then the third thing to consider is that in order to create fair and equitable process around this, you need to have the same number of levels across all your teams, even if you don't use all the levels, because otherwise it's really hard to calibrate. And then of course, when you bring compensation in, this will become a challenge. So the third piece is connecting the dots between the role and the level. So levels should be standardized at the organization, but the way that you really create context to enable employees to grow specifically in their role as well as at your company is to create what we call role-based competency frameworks. So this is just an example of what it might look like for an engineer. In this case, there's 12 competencies on the bottom left. On the right side, you can see that each competency is then mapped to a level. So if I'm an engineer, these are the skills that I need to be developing in. If I'm at a level 5, this is what it means to be a level 5. Here's the definition of this particular competency, and here's some example behaviors and tasks. I can also see what that looks like at other levels, and that's also how you'll calibrate performance for those levels. It's usually a combination of hard skills, soft skills, and what I'm seeing more and more is that companies are also integrating their values as part of competencies so that you're measured on how you show up for the organization. The next one is around creating structure and small batch feedback. So when we look at these career frameworks, this is basically giving you the foundation for how do you actually coach and develop talent in a meaningful way, and how do you do that fairly. So if you have a career framework that isn't defined by level, for example, and you're putting everybody through a performance cycle and you're assessing everybody on, let's say, communication, or if it's engineers, maybe it's, frameworks and foundations, and you don't have those competencies defined by level, then that brings in a lot of types of bias. So of course, with performance reviews, you have things like recency bias, but this also will create things like rater bias. The manager needs to know what the expectation is, and so does the employee, and that needs to be available before and after any type of rating. So it's good to have a feedback culture where it's competency-based, and the definitions of those competencies can be pulled anytime. So this is just an example of like what it would be like to give somebody feedback on a specific skill with the definition of that skill at a certain level. And then the last way I would say is to standardize continuous, like a continuous feedback and how that connects to the growth loop. So this is just an example. We can share this out also so you can look at this in more detail. But basically, what is the cadence and structure that's created, and how are you kind of embedding that into your culture? For example, at Pando, we use a Slack bot to remind everybody that it's Feedback Friday, and we ask everybody to give somebody within the organization feedback. We also do that at the end of month or quarter when we're doing sort of reflections on whether or not we hit our goals as a company, and people will look at that individually as well. So I think on a weekly cadence, it's important for managers and employees to request feedback or give feedback, any kind of feedback. Competency-based feedback makes it a lot easier to give and get feedback as well, because you're not like, oh God, what am I giving feedback on this person for this week? I don't know, It gives you a way to be specific about the kind of feedback you're giving. You can check in on goals, of course, monthly basis, same thing, but maybe have employees start logging achievements on a regular basis so that it isn't like at the end of the year, you're thinking, okay, what did I do in the last 12 months? But you already have a log of all of the impact that you've had. Quarterly, we do this thing called Look Back Outlook. It's like you're looking back at what you did in the quarter, you're planning for the next quarter. You do what we call a career sync. This is like taking the insights from that, but also having a designated conversation around your career and what your next steps are. And then semi-annual might be if you are doing sort of a formal performance process. So it's really about creating little frameworks and touch points to have those conversations. So I will end with the benefits of this. I think it's clear kind of what some of those are, but of course, retaining talent is probably the number one most important thing. And career advancement is the thing that we all hear the most for why employees leave. And I think that it's important to know that if it's not clear and not transparent and not visible and accessible to them, they will not think that they have career progression. So it accelerates growth and performance. It can make those performance evaluations much more short, iterative, agile, and of course, accelerate employee growth, which will drive impact on the business. So that was very rapid fire. I think I went a little bit over, so sorry for that. But thanks everybody for joining me, and see you soon.
That was brilliant, and you didn't go over. And yeah, it is sometimes a bit of a challenge. So appreciate that. Lots of questions that I'm going to keep till the end and our conversation with Linda. But thank you so much. Sparking lots of different ideas there. Thank you, Barbara.
Of course.
See you soon. So yeah, Barbara will be back in about 15 or so minutes when we have our chat at the end. Lots of questions coming to mind and scribbling down right now, as I say. But let's move on. Let's move to our next storyteller for the hour. And her name is Linda Jonas, and she's a performance consultant, management trainer, and workshop facilitator on a mission to create human-friendly performance cultures. Very much kindred spirits in that kind of in that kind of ethos. For a decade, she's helped build and grow the performance management startup Small Improvements from before the first paying customer to a massive global success. Together with Jason Lauritsen, who you might be familiar with in our community, she founded Check In to Thrive, a leadership training company developing high-performing cultures that improve employees' lives by harnessing the power of relationship and connection. Her years of living and working even as a digital nomad throughout the US, Canada, Australia, and Europe made Linda an avid remote work evangelist. Some synergies there with Barbara. Thanks to her insights into global approaches, expansive network, and awareness of cultural differences, Linda is a perfect partner for international teams and new work initiatives. I first met Linda during the pandemic when we were both facing we're all facing quite extreme challenges, and I'm really glad that she's back to speak to you today. So please welcome Linda. Hello.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And how lucky are we that years have passed since our first meeting?
I know. And like I said, I'm just going to exit stage right, and I'll be back probably with lots of different questions after your talk. So see you in about 15 minutes or so.
Looking forward to that. Thank you, Matt. Performance management. Yeah, we'll go into the slides a little bit later. I just want to start a little bit with what I'm going to talk about. And I want to talk less about performance management, which I'm sure hearing Barbara and her approach, she's very happy about, and really look more into how do we actually enable performance for our people. So having worked 10 years for a performance management software, I saw just how much energy and time and hope we're bestowing into the systems of collections and the procedures to get insights on performance, right? And we can totally discuss performance reviews afterwards, but there's a lot of time that goes into that, and there is a good reason for it, and that's all good and important. But I was always wondering, like, how can we, or do we actually spend enough time on helping people become better and driving performance, like from the bottom up driving performance, right? There's different drivers of performance, and technology is one of them. But another one is also organizations and their setups, the processes, the hierarchies, cultures, purpose, all of that can enable or hinder performance. And a third driver is managers, right? They're a massive driver, and particularly when we're talking about distributed teams, managers are like the power nodes who hold the teams together, and they can very much be an enabler of performance or not. So I want to spend today to look at how can we make sure that we measure in our performance management systems the right levels or standards that actually reflect of the capabilities and skills that our people have. And how can we help people do their best work and feel appreciated and seen and acknowledged? The question is, are we giving each and every person enough of what they need? And are we there to remove the obstacles to even, see them perform at their levels? And again, we're talking about distributed teams. And as you've heard before, I also started my distributed work working from Sydney, Australia, with a founder in Berlin and most of the customers in the San Francisco Bay Area. So very much remote in 2011. We don't easily see into the worlds of our colleagues, of our teams. I was managing a team from Sydney, and most of them were in Australia. Later on, I had a person in Berlin as well, which made it all very tricky. But when we're working with the people, we often don't know what they're struggling with and what obstacles they're facing, simply because we are so removed. Are they crystal clear about their expectations? Do they feel connected to the team, to the company, to the purpose, to the common goals that we're achieving? And do they have the equipment, tools, environments that they need to succeed? And are they well? Or do they have some personal matters or other arguments that distract them? Maybe they didn't get enough sleep because of a newborn baby or puppy or whatever it might be. Or maybe they're in back-to-back meetings all the time, working with different teams, and they're just simply drained or have other things holding them back. All we know is that when we're not well, when we're not satisfied with work, or when we lack the drive and motivation, there is simply no way that we can perform at the best level that we as individuals can perform. So, as Matt said, I'm Linda Jonas. I worked as a digital nomad. I managed distributed teams. I worked in hybrid teams. I worked in in-person teams. And I want to share with you today the most powerful skill to master, to drive performance, to foster engagement, to build connection and trust and relationship, and to be a great manager and even like a great person beyond. And that is knowing how to check in effectively with your people. And when you think about it, like, you know, when you have it, you probably have a person in mind that really cares about you, really asks how you are, wants to know what, you know, how you're doing, checks in on such a deep personal level that you feel fully supported. Think about that person and think about how they make you feel. Like, that's pretty powerful. And I'll now share with you a simple 4-step framework from the management training that I'm doing with Jason Lauritsen at Check In to Thrive. And that's going to change the way that you manage from now on. And it's so simple and straightforward that you can start right away after this program to check in with your colleagues or your friends, partner, children, neighbor, whoever. All right, so with that, let's go into the slides a little further. Thank you. Oh, I can do that myself. That's right. The check-in conversation. The check-in conversation is super powerful in many ways because it helps us to learn what's really going on with our people. It helps us to build connection and trust and relationships, as I mentioned a second ago. And it also helps us to identify the needs of our people and the obstacles so that we can do something about them. And a check-in can be like a standalone 5-minute meeting at the beginning of a one-on-one, or it can be an impromptu check-in. There are different formats of it, but there is a simple 4-step formula that we'll look at. And the first part of the check-in conversation is to start with a great question. And this is actually where most check-ins already fall short, because a great question invites a response that requires a follow-up question. And what is a question that we usually ask when we check in with people? Exactly. How are you? And what are the answers that we're getting? Fine, good, busy, or whatever 4-letter word we can think of. But what do we do with that answer? Pretty much nothing. It doesn't invite us to ask further. And even more so, we have learned that this is just a phrase. I'm German and I studied in London. And when I first moved to England, I thought when people were asking me, how are you doing? That they actually cared and wanted to hear an answer. So, you know, I was like at university with my peers saying like, you know what, I didn't sleep too well. And actually, like, I'm a little bit anxious about that upcoming deadline. How are you? And you should have seen the look on their face, like, what are you on about? It's a simple question. We don't really want to know the answer to that. Like, spare us with the details. We have learned that this question is just a phrase and that the right answer is short. So it is not a great question because we've learned it, and also because it's so high level that, like, any answer to that, how are you, is not really leaving us with much. So what can we do to create a great question that invites a response and demands a follow-up? Well, there's one simple hack in how we can turn this question into a great question, and that is, how are you on a scale from 1 to 10? Sounds similar, but it's a super powerful way to turn that around. Because when I say 7, and you don't get curious and you don't ask me a follow-up, I'll leave like quite confused and weirded out, because a 7, like, I probably need to think about why I said 7 and what that means. So having an answer, having a number really begs a follow-up question. And then that's exactly what you do. Ask the follow-up question. Now, depending on what they say, obviously that differs. So if that is an 8 to a 10, this is a moment to celebrate and to connect. Great. What is working well? Tell me more about it. You know, it's a fun moment to hear what is driving someone up to be well and happy. If it's any number between like a 7, a 4 and a 7, like, this is an opportunity to explore the ups and the downs, the wins and the challenges. Like, okay, what is going well for you? And what are some things that are missing to bring you up to a higher number, like a 9 or a 10, right? This is a conversation, obviously, to be had. And then 1 to 3, this is a cry for help. This is you needing to show compassion, to offer support, and to get into the most important and only conversation that is important on that day, like, what is going on? Like, that doesn't sound good. What's going on that's bringing that number down? Oh, or like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Like, do you feel comfortable sharing with what's going on in your life? Like this, can you see how quickly, by just changing the how are you to add a number, you get right into the conversation that you need to have, and you get so much more detail. Well, and after you get an answer to that, your role is to really, really listen. And you need to listen to what they're saying, to what they're not saying, to their body language. Like, there's a bunch of active listening skills that you can, and I encourage you to look at, to see, but like some quick ones here to look at. Make eye contact. That really helps to stay in tune and be with a person and be present, and also encourages the other person to continue to talk. Noticing the whole person, as I said, like the body language, the physical demeanor, like, you know, all of the things they're bringing with them, that's so much more than just the words. And we can see that through camera as well. Staying tuned in. If you tune out for some reason, like, be upfront, apologize and say, can you please repeat that? I missed it. I'm sorry. Taking notes is a good one. Allowing space. This is, you know, creating a safe space and allowing space for the discussion to evolve. Asking clarifying questions to go deeper, using playback technique, like, this is what I heard, is that what you meant? Removing any distractions. There are heaps more, but really listening in to what the people are saying, so that then, to close up the check-in conversation, the fourth step is then to offer any kind of support or encouragement, obviously depending how the conversation went, right? Like, if they're an 8 or a 9, like, that's fantastic. You know, is there something that I can help you with to keep that going? Or maybe some other questions, if it, you know, generic questions are more like, you know, how can I help? Or if things are not going too well, maybe you can ask, you know, what do you need from me right now? Or a great question is also, what does support from me look like for you? So this is really then the end, and obviously then doing something about it as well to help. As a recap, the 4 steps to a great check-in conversation is: number 1, ask a great question. Number 2, ask the follow-up question. Number 3, really listen. And number 4, offer support and encouragement. And if you're thinking like, okay, that's great, Linda. How are you on a scale of 1 to 10 is a good question, but surely there's more. Yes, there are many other great questions, and my colleague Jason Lauritsen has put together a fantastic cheat sheet with 18 great check-in questions, how to check in with regards to performance. Thank you for that link. The link is down there. How to check in with a human with regards to performance, career discussions, as Barbara mentioned. Obviously, career development is super important, like a lot of great starting points for you to have the conversations that matter with the people who matter. So enjoy that. And one very last word of caution, like every skill, it's something that you get better at as you practice. And especially when you're starting out or when you're new in a relationship or when you're asking children, like I do this with my cousin's children, the results might not be ideal in the beginning. My cousin's son always says 10, and sometimes to show his emotions, he's going to an 11. So we needed to recalibrate what 1 to 10 means. And we're at a point now where we're at least talking between 7 and 10. And they're really good now and go straight into the discussions and like, yep, that's what's lifting it up. That's what's bringing it down. So it's a really fun way. I wish you fun with that and happy exploring and happy checking in. I'd love to hear how you go with your check-ins, also particularly with regards to work. And connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like to discuss performance management or leadership training, or just want to geek out on people stuff or remote work. Happy to connect with you. Thank you. And over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. And Barbara's back in the room with us as well. So thank you both so much for your views and perspectives. Along with Jenny, we've definitely got three different tracks there, which is great and lots to unpack. Firstly, Linda, just finishing off your session, just want to say sorry on behalf of everybody in England. So when they asked you, how are you? And they didn't really want to know the answer. I do apologize for that.
I just learned from the cues, I just assembled it, integrated myself.
So yeah, I really like it's the shame of that. And also, I suppose actually before I start asking questions, are there any takeaways you both took from that you'd like to share that you hadn't thought of before? And before I start, filling the air with my thoughts and asking you things.
Linda is so calm and soothing. I'm like, hey. No, I think I thought the research stuff was really interesting, and even the use of WhatsApp I thought was pretty interesting. I know I'm like in the knowledge worker sort of office space category of workforce, but I think that's interesting. And also I will say I've seen more use of texting and WhatsApping, even with customers, strangely feeling just more open to communicating that way for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe we just all really want to connect with people.
I know it's a weird boundary to cross, because I've definitely seen that both from an internal perspective and a customer perspective too. And I suppose
I also was really curious what she was going to say our percentage of job doing was, because she's like 90% of the time they're doing their job, and then office workers, I was like, yes.
Well, the two questions that come from Jenny's talk, and then I want to move on to your talk. I suppose firstly, you're mentioning, like you say, what would the difference be between remote and office workers or dispersed workers? And I found it's interesting that team meetings have gone down in dispersed workforces, whereas the perception for desk-based, it seems that it's gone up quite a lot with Teams and Zoom and everything. And I what is your take on the?
It's definitely not the case for office workers.
Yeah, can we have too many meetings? Bezos famously says it's 10 minutes. You have to stand up and go through. That there's a short meeting. What's your take on the good use of a meeting.
Well, I have a friend who founded a company called Fellow, which is like a meeting tool, and they actually just launched a meeting coster, so you can like put all the people in and like figure out how much each meeting costs by default, which really helps deter some meetings, because it's like, do you really need a meeting on this? I know at Pando for a while there was a lot of meeting fatigue and over meetings. I think it's like everyone wanting to have one-on-one check-ins with everyone else. It's like, ugh. I mean, I'm a founder and CEO, so obviously I just like, is that really necessary? But I think balancing like actually having work meetings that are important and like creating space that's timed and designated and consistent for people to have, you know, that connection and social time, I think is important with distributed teams. And if you do have those spaces, and we have them in a combination of like, we have monthly social where everyone has brunch and we play games. We have like a builders workshop, it's called, which is like a quarterly crowdsourcing of what are we going to build, what features are we going to like, and everybody gets to come. So there's different formats of kind of this time you spend together, but it's consistent. And I think if you have that, then you can kind of reduce the need for, you know, people wanting to have like one-on-ones or, you know, weekly meetings for everything.
I think meetings have been broken for a long time, way before we started to work distributed and globally. And I think, you know, echoing a little bit, but also maybe adding a little bit more nuance, knowing what a meeting is for and whether we actually need to have that meeting is super powerful. And we didn't do it enough in office. And then we moved into just having more meetings online because there was nothing else. Like even the water cooler chat needed to be a meeting now and needed to be scheduled. So it's being way more intentional, about the time that we need to spend with people and what we need to get out of the context with folks, to then have, like, as you said, Barbara, you know, the social time, the check-in time, the team time. But yeah, at the same time, that is super important, the connection. We just need to think about what needs to be a meeting, what can also be done in writing or in a different format.
And the last, like, you know, reference back to Jenny's talk was, I suppose, and kind of like going to yours, Linda, is around, you know, those check-in conversations. And I suppose comms channels are really, really important in that instance. If you're going to display active listening, a WhatsApp message, or, you know, how you're on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, you need to really think about what kind of communication channel you're going to use to have those conversations. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that as well.
I mean, I remember when I started working for Small Improvements, and suddenly customers wanted to connect with me on Facebook. And I felt like that was like a sort of intrusion a little bit on, like, this is my private life. And now we have like customers and other people coming in. And then these days it's like even further, like the WhatsApp or whatever that we use for friends. I think it's just different ways of communicating. Important though is to know or to have some standards and rituals about what is communicated, how and where. And I think to really know how someone is, well, if you don't care, just ask, how are you? And you get a fine on Slack or WhatsApp or whatever, and you're good. But that's a false positive to think that you have actually checked in with people. So if we don't take the time to really care about someone and sort of give the space and ask a good question and give the time as well to connect with folks, then, I mean, we get out what we get in. So I'd say, like, you know, WhatsApp or other channels are fantastic for many things. But in order to really know how someone is, and granted, if you're the CEO and founder, it probably doesn't need to be on a daily basis with everyone on your team. But like as a manager with your team, there should be a certain threshold of like a minimum of time that you check in with someone. And when you get a feeling of like, oh, that person maybe is drifting off or changing, and you see a difference in their behavior, very latest then is a good time to reach out and schedule a check-in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a connection perspective, that's really important, especially with managers. And otherwise, I would say just from a distributed teamwork perspective, the workplace is a system, and it's important to have intention about how you're using different channels for specific things and be consistent about that, and also probably over communicate. So I think, like, when I was at Miro, a big part of the team was in an office and only a small part of the team was distributed. And I was advocating for, and we did make that shift to default to as if we were completely distributed, because even those 10 people who felt like they didn't fully get the context or they were missing something that was happening in the room or whatever, it made a huge difference to just like consistently behave in a way that we were like fully distributed and also have clarity around how you're using channels and for what.
Fantastic. Moving on to what you were discussing, Barbara. I guess, it's an ingrained mindset, isn't it? The annual, it's obviously come from schools and different past generations where you just have the education system was like an exam at the end, and, just didn't have to give feedback at all. How, if you're listening to you and you're going, oh, I want that in my organization, how do you shift that mindset from an annual to continuous feedback? What can you point to?
Yeah, I mean, it's that easy. I think, interestingly, like, companies want to do it. I think the embedded kind of mindset that's surprising for me is that employees actually push back on like not always getting top marks. It's like,
right,
we need to disconnect how you're rated in a review context around performance and how you're progressing through an organization from, oh, I'm an A or a B or a C or a D or whatever. Like, this point system is so, which I think it's broken in education too. Like, what the hell are we even doing? It's like everybody learns differently. Everybody has different skills. The way that they can the way that we can optimize and kind of unlock that potential is very different depending on like a mix of things for each person. Because like with Pando, for example, it's not a one rating. It's like a continuum. Like, you have kind of like a percentage to the next level, kind of as if you were almost playing like a video game. Like, you learn skills, you do things, and then you level up. It's about leveling up. It's not about like promotions necessarily.
Yeah.
So I think, the biggest thing from my perspective that's been the missing link is a lot of the stuff that we talked through just around creating the core structure and foundation. Like, the reason that it wouldn't work before is because if you don't have actual clear guidelines, not check boxes, but like, these are the expectations for someone at this level. These are the expectations for certain skills. These are the types of things you can be doing. And then if people can track and create evidence around that, then you've got like your full context around it. But it's definitely not an easy thing. It's something that many companies want to do and struggle with because there's so much baggage. Why did I sign up for this? Don't ask me, but I do kind of love it.
Every founder goes through those moments. That is really interesting, though, in the sense that it's the employees pushing back rather than the employer, and
they just push back on like, oh, 3 is on, like, if you're rated at the difference with competency based is that like it's more nuanced. Your whole value of perception is not based on one rating of meets expectations or doesn't, right? It's like, in these 3 dimensions, you're on track, you're doing everything great. In these 3, you're you're killing it, you're at the next level. And then maybe these ones are areas that you need to grow. So at least you have a much more kind of diverse and nuanced view of how you're performing, not like you're a 3.
Well, yeah, and I think I love the word progression, because one of my favorite. I think what we try and help organizations do, and what we do with the Top Inspire Workplaces, is it's progression, not perfection. So getting rid of that score, it's just, as long as you're progressing things and improving things, you're on that journey. You don't suddenly to throw a score in there like almost arbitrarily. It's just doesn't help.
I'll just add one more thing, because obviously small improvements, the name came also program and business. Like the goal was always to make it more ongoing on a regular basis and have regular feedback and the continuous growth. But one of the two challenges that I mentioned, one is that organizations at a higher level often want to have that box where they put the people in. So they needed something to be like, oh, here are the people who will get more money. Here are the people that we need to do some work with or manage them out. And these lot are fine. So that pushback is one that is really hard to overcome by. So I challenge every company to think like, why are we actually doing performance management and what do we need to get out of it to get that right? And then the second point is that everyone will game the system. And if you learn at school you learn how to get a good mark, but you don't learn to retain the information for life, because no one comes back in 5 years' time and says like, do you still know that? No, you just learn for that test, or you know how to get.
By the way, it's because you don't need to know that. So it's also the things that we value in the system is not the right stuff. And I think that's like it. To your point, it's like it reinforces inauthentic behavior. I think that's a really important thing.
That's super important at work as well, because this is what we measure at school. What do we measure at work? Can we just be clear about the expectations and then measure adequately about that, and not put in more systems that people can game, because they will at any point.
My goal is to get like continuous progression and pay aligned so that you're like paying as you go for people's performance. And what I truly believe is that like the more somebody is growing, as long as you have the right structure and alignment, the more impact they're going to have. And it's like, coming from a sales and marketing background, you want to double down on the things that are generating the most outcome, right? So it's like, why arbitrarily hold people back? And also like, what is the cost implication of not doing that? But that's a whole nother power hour.
Well, if you'll permit me, I would like to ask, like, we're over the hour, and we could always, I think we could probably do an hour conversation like Bill Maher has his real time after whatever it's called on YouTube. So we probably need to do something like that next year on our power hours. But I guess I've got so many other questions going on here, but what, if I look at like some of the core issues people identify for managing dispersed teams, from a communications perspective, building trust, collaboration, connection, productivity, managing burnout, because aren't those just something you need to do for everybody rather than it being dispersed? And then therefore, isn't it just how you manage that communication with the people who aren't in the office or in the factory? Is actually the issues are the same, aren't they? Or are there unique circumstances and unique issues that dispersed workforces have?
I just think they're exasperated by distributed. I think a lot of it is the same, like what Linda was talking about in these connections. I mean, the how are you is a question that was asked in live one-on-one meetings for, since the dawn of civilization, and it's a useless way to do it, right? So I think there's unique challenges, but also it's pretty much just like, we need to do better.
Yeah, I think we get a lot of false positives when working in an office, and we think that we're doing right, but we weren't and we aren't. And working distributed there's the railway is off, or whatever, the curtain is off, whatever the phrase is that I'm looking for. But like it's all exposed. It's exaggerated, and it's exposed all of the flaws that we have. So when you learn how to lead well in a remote setting or manage performance well, you will be a much better leader and manager, and you will manage performance much better in office as well, because then we have the same standards and rule, and not by coincidence because we happen to be whatever together.
Right.
Perfect. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before I try and bring this all together and finish? I'm so grateful to you both.
I just love the format of the three very different talks. I really enjoyed like the research, and to Barbara's point, I don't know all that much about deskless workers as well. So that was interesting. Love to talk, Barbara, and I'm much looking forward to diving deeper with you as well on a separate occasion on that, because that's just career and development. This is one of the goals why we do performance management, to help people grow and succeed, right? So love that. So thank you, Matt, for having me.
Oh,
yeah, thanks for having me too. It was a great convo.
Thank you. like I say, there's so much more. Barbara mentioned the shift in power, which we saw, which is definitely a great thing. You know, over the past few weeks and months, you're starting to see people like Nike, you know, back to 4 days in the office. You know, is there that dynamic that's going to shift back again? Will they just start to dispose of the progress we've made? Talking about, you know, Linda's talking about, you know, the trains off the tracks and it's exposed things. Can we make sure we keep pushing forward and improving these processes and the steps that we've made in the next months and years to come? I'm really, really grateful to the how are you? We went from how are you to how are you really, to try and expose that a bit more. But then how are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Seems so simple. The net promoter question almost for your state in real life. And I can't believe nobody's mentioned it before. And so thank you so much for that, because I will be using that with everybody I come across who I really, really, you know, care about. And I think one of the last overriding thoughts really was, we talk about human-centered and people first, and a lot of everything that has come out of these 3 talks is actually helping people become better people. So it will benefit those that they work around and also the people that they live with, and the family members. So just becoming a better person, going in and asking and checking on them in the right way. So I really appreciate it. I'd love to have had another hour to speak with you both, and maybe we do a follow-up at some point again next year. But thank you both. Thanks for everybody who's listening live, or if you've been watching this on demand. We have one more Power Hour to go this year. We have 2 events in London tomorrow and New York on Wednesday. And then that's a wrap for 2023. So thanks for being with us so far, and see you again soon.
Thank
you
you
very much.